Alrighty then. Hello. This is Monday and it is my Airwindows live stream. So bear with me while I fuss over some of these details. For instance, my usual drill of setting up my streaming window so I can kind of see what's happening, but so I don't have a little talking head distracting the crap out of me the entire time, because that would never do. Alrighty, taking care of that. And hi, we're going to do a version of a Biquad filter today, and maybe also talk about my alien clave inventions. I'm doing more music theory stuff, and that should prove interesting. So we'll just kind of get rolling. I feel like maybe I should jump on the coding part first. I'll switch back to main camera if we end up talking about the clave thing. It's been pretty exciting because what I was doing was watching Adam Neely videos and getting ideas, and that's always helpful. This is going to be a bear of a programming stream. I have quite a lot in mind. I want to do a Biquad filter that has smoothing, so you can move the controls around wildly and not get zipper noise, because people were wanting that out of the Z-Plane plugins. And if I can make that happen, I'll have a new default. And I will also have a platform upon which I can build a new version of the Z plugins. And that can go as smoothly as the Z plugins already did, because it'll be just updating of that stuff. I can have that going for a while. But firstly, I also want to grab a note that I had. Hi, Jazz. There it is. These are the notes. Gosh, excuse me. Yeah, so these are the notes that I had. And the purpose, there's two purposes to this. And it might require me fussing a little bit over that after I stream. Depends upon how much information I can get together during the stream. But half of this is making the Biquad be a smoothed one. And half of it is updating the Biquad so that I'm using enums instead of numbers for the things inside the Biquad. Some of that's going to require me looking stuff up. I will just see. Maybe I'll do a little web searching or something, and we'll get there. We'll get through. It's not necessarily going to be easy or obvious, but we'll get through. Or at least I'm sure it's obvious to some people, but I'm not one of them, so I'm not concerned about that. Let's go back over to where we're going to be working. Open up Xcode and open up my Biquad. AU. And we're going to use this version as my base for what I'm going to build. By the way, I hope you've been enjoying the stuff I'm doing with Bespoke, because that's turning into a real interesting exploration. The amount of stuff, like, it is arguably more freeing and exciting to work with than my hardware modular synth, while being basically pretty much the same thing. Something about how it's represented and handled is just more modular-y than the real modular or even like VCV Rack. It's almost like I hesitated on VCV Rack for a long time. Hey, Andy. Because I sensed that there was this out there. I think I'd seen it somewhere before. And wasn't as enthusiastic about getting into a thing that was doing like all of the simulated faceplates of hardware modular and the types of patch cords for hardware modular and all of these things, including using people's like the mutable instrument stuff out of hardware modular and the big ecosystem of hardware modular and all of that kind of stuff. It started to feel, I think, to me like it was just a image of hardware modular, in the sense that so many plugins are images of existing hardware processors. And that's never really been my thing, so I guess I kind of dragged my feet, and now I've stumbled across Bespoke, and that's a much more natural match for how I see things. How am I doing? I'm doing pretty good. Let's get going with this. I'm going to sort of walk through it bit by bit. The one we're going to make today is going to be called Biquad Plus. So my first order of business is to rapidly copy all of this stuff from the existing Biquad over so that I can start from a known quantity. And we're going to call this BiQP. If you can't see everything on the screen perfectly, I'll fix that later. Biquad Plus. Actually, BIQ is probably a good lead-off for the enums. If you don't understand what that means, you'll see pretty soon. And let's copy everything over as rapidly as I can. I'm copying between Biquad parameters and Biquad, and we're just going from here because we're not really going to need to include additional sliders at this time. All we're really going to do is set this up so that it works, and then make it so it has the smoothing, and do this over again. There'll be another enum, and it'll be all of the things that go into this bit here, except for this bit here is going to be bigger, and I don't know exactly how much bigger right now. So I'll figure that out at my convenience, I guess. That's it for this one. Goodbye, goodbye. Also, fair warning, this could be one of my more unintelligible streams because I actually have to do thinking, and so I'll be saying stuff without translating it, and coding as fast as I possibly can, and just doing that as well as I can. And the goal is to get to where I'm working on stuff one thing at a time. Firstly, let me delete these. That's me starting to explain again. I was just saying how I'm not going to be able to explain. Some of this needs to be copied over, so I'm going to copy all of it rather than thinking about what there is. It's like some of it's 1.02. Actually, I'm not sure any of it is. Let me see what we've got here. Paste this in and make it like the previous one that I'm working from. And yeah, nothing is literally like the VST plugin would be. This one's 1 to 4 indexed. This one is 0.001 to 1, although it is trimmed. The smoothing part is the way that the Z-plane filters don't have zipper noise. And my biquads tend to have zipper noise, so we're going to try to do a thing where we're defining the coefficients of the biquads, and then for every sample, we're not only doing those coefficients, but we're quickly generating an interpolation between a beginning and a end setting for those. And in theory, that should work as far as smoothing anything that you could be doing. It might also work to make the Biquad freak out much more intensely, because Biquads don't like to be changed while they're operating, but that's a separate problem that I'm not worried about at all. That's par for the course. If you're using this form, then you're going to deal with its downsides. Later, I will learn how to do a state variable filter. I've got a bunch of notes on another computer, like bookmarks and stuff, all about how that's done. And I haven't dug into it, so it ain't happening today. And lastly, we copy all of this, including everything in the end. And where did I start? I started after this, so it's the same as doing this. And my first build will not work because, again, I've said this before, this has these libraries after this, so it's trying to build these things before it gets to these. Having worked its way through this and gone, this is all broken, it builds these, and then it has the code it needs to refer to. And now when I build it again, it's fine. That's a quirk of the way I've got this set up. I could change it, I just haven't bothered. I think if I dragged this down to be under these folders, it would be fine. And so now let's take a moment and confirm that this worked. Once we've done that, then we can start getting into some of these other details. I was just listening to this to confirm that the speakers were working. So if I select Airwindows, which is going to give me the component files, and Biquad Plus, what do we have? That's a Butterworth filter. And that's a resonant filter. I might want to take this frequency and use the version of it that I've got in probably the low pass for the Z-plane filters, because I think I've got it better than this. I think this is maybe not the best way of arranging it. And you don't hear that much in terms of zipper noise, but it is there. So we'll confirm that does actually work. This is dry, and then inverse. Is strangely implemented, as a matter of fact. I'm not quite sure why it's doing this, but it wants inverse of 0.5 to act as the literal subtractive thing. Because if you have a inverse dry wet and you're doing a low pass filter, the inverse of that is taking away what the low pass filter did. And I'd actually come to think of it, I totally know why this is doing what it's doing. Full on, this is the low pass filter. Inverse means this is the low pass filter out of phase. And then if you combine that with dry at 50%, that's where you get your cancellation. Similarly, with the high pass, that turns into a low pass, and then with the peak, it turns into a notch, and with the notch, turns into a peak. Although you can't really make it be a steep peak by doing the inverse blend. But we can do kind of strange things this way. This is a very tight notch being translated into a strange little peak. Or this is a peak with very high headroom being translated into a weird notch that inverts itself and goes back out the other way. Set it to this. There, see, it is a peak with a fairly steep filter, and then there's the inversion, so it becomes a notch, but it's a notch that kind of goes through, and it's too complicated to explain. Heck with this. Let's go back into the coding. My point being that is just something that my normal Biquad is capable of doing. I'm not going to do a smoothing factor and roll it off by one pole low pass. I want the setting to go immediately to the new setting instantly at the speed of whatever the update frequency is. So we're not having a slow chase in the way that Purest Fade or Purest Gain do it. My intention here is definitely to do it so that it's interpolating along the sample buffer. And that may or may not, there's conditions under which that wouldn't actually fix zipper noise if the zipper noise is like updating irregularly, but I'm not really concerned about that because I know that like doing it with this interpolating is going to be a way of kind of, like I'm not interested in just smoothing. I want to do it the way that the Z-Plane filter guys did it. And one of the ways they did it is by doing these morphs, by making interpolation targets. And then all of the little factors in their biquad filter would get interpolated between the different positions. And that's how they would do stuff like weird morphs between vowel sounds and stuff, is multiple resonant filters that would merge into other multiple resonant filters. They would sort of make a complicated composite thing and morph that. We're going to do something like that. So here, our first concern here is to get a basic enum going. So let's get a basic enum going. It's going to live, it could live up here, or it could live down here, be a private thing. Maybe that would be good. Let's see, first of all, let's see whether that works. Well, first of all, copy this so I have the syntax right, because I've never written one of these before. And we technically do not need these numbers here. So I'm going to see whether I can leave them out and have it work. And we're not going to use these names because those belong to something else. Instead, we need to use stuff that's part of the biquad filter. So let's go and look up what that would mean. I'm going to stick this over where I can read it, but it's hiding underneath the chat. And thankfully, in my comment here, I've written what I need to know. This is the stuff that, well, hang on. No, I guess that's right. We'll start with that. If I've got that super wrong, I'll figure it out eventually. This is alien territory for me. But And if I save, that should go blue. Blue means it has accepted it as a sort of enum name target kind of thing. I'm going to try to use shorter names. It doesn't matter what the frequency range is. It can be anything I want it to be. We'll call it Rezo. In fact, let's just type this out directly. And a 0 this is part of how the Biquad filter works, so we're going to kind of go with that. And I want an A2, yep, there we go. I do not want these parentheses, these semicolons. I've just done that wrong. Let me fix it. I'm not used to using commas here. Never type this. It can be anything I want it to be. One thing about my stock Biquad is it definitely does not leave off at just 20 Hertz. It'll go lower than that. The way that I'm using the long doubles means I can calculate Biquads with really wild values, although they cannot go higher than the Nyquist frequency without breaking. They can go very close to the Nyquist frequency, and it can go very close to 0 Hertz. And JAS, yep, that is, I'm calculating coefficients on the go from the ones that I'm calculating using the Biquad math, and I'll be interpolating between them, and I'll be defining some more enums for the purposes of letting it do this calculating on the fly. So what we're going to do is do that. Let's keep going. Firstly, I have to make sure that this works. If this doesn't work, I have to stop and make something else. Interestingly, I don't need to, oh God, the semicolon again. I do not know how to write these. Comma. And let's see, stored delayed sample. What was I saying with this? 7 and 8, and also there's going to be more in another one. Maybe I should code this with space for the stereo version from the word go. Let's open the VST version. That'll give me what I need. As I don't really mind having some extra numbers sitting around, some extra long double space sitting around in the AU version if it means I can have this working consistently across everything. It's not that high of a price to pay, especially since it's not actually going to be getting used. Where am I going? I'm going to Airwindows, I'm going to plugins, I'm going to Mac VST, and original Biquad, at which point it should be updated and should say, let's see, it's going to be in Biquad proc. There we go. That's what I need. See where 7 and 8 it says left, left, and there's 2 stored delayed samples. I was thinking of these as like B1 and B2, but those are actually coefficients. 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 are not actually coefficients. They are the samples that we use to calculate this stuff. So I'm going to copy that over into the code that I've just placed here. And then I'm going to look into Biquad H and see that it says 11. Now, that's going to get even bigger, but for now, it's going to be 11. When I say even bigger, what I mean is I'm going to build stuff into this. But let's start by, we might as well leave the this open over here because I'm going to be building a stereo version. But mostly I'm just setting things in place. I'm setting the size of this in place, and I'm setting all of these variables in place so that when I want to do the stereo version, I can just go over to the VST and have that be ready to go. Why will there be a Hermé LP for mastering? Why would you be using a low pass for mastering? Typically, mastering is going to look for high passes and not look for simple roll-off filters. That's the last thing people usually want to do in mastering. Usually they want to make stuff much brighter. And that's an interesting challenge in its own right. But back to this. And back to having this and that open. I need this open so that I can refer to it. Boy, I'm going to get through my coffee in no time this way. I'm drinking the good coffee this morning. It's I have 3 canisters of different kinds of coffee beans that I grind as needed. And the bottom one is like low test. It's this breakfast blend thing that's very mellow. And the middle one is sort of my preferred kind, which is called, what the hell is it called? I'm thinking of too many other things. I can't think. I just can't think. Fogbuster by a company called Pierce Brothers. And then the top, the high test, is partly Fogbuster and partly from a company, I believe, in California somewhere. Dean's Beans, if I'm not mistaken. And it's Ahab's Revenge, meaning it's basically Robusta. And I can't drink coffee out of just only Robusta because it's like you just get too damn wired on that stuff. But the interesting thing about Robusta is it might have more caffeine, but it also has less oils. And that means 2 things. It has less flavor. It has less of an interesting flavor if you're a coffee fancier. But it is also easier on your stomach. And that's useful too because my stomach's been struggling in recent weeks. So back over to this. Left stored delayed sample. I'm going to have, we'll have that be LS1 maybe I should call it sample L1. And maybe it should be capitals because I usually use that as a factor of how I do what I do. Often when I'm making things, variables, multiple things, I'm tacking on a capital L or a capital R at the end. No, not a semicolon. What am I doing? I've never typed enums before, so I'm just not naturally going for the right things. And there we have the sample left 1, the sample left 2, sample right 1, and sample right 2, as is spelled out here. And these things, I don't actually have to build into other places, but I need them to refer to. And in this mono version, I'm just going to use the left. I'm not going to use the right. That'll just sit there not being used as anything. And let's see now. Firstly, let's save. All those turned blue, so I know that I've accepted them. Let's see if it builds. I'm not using them yet. It builds. I wanted to also have another one. Let's see, this would become 11. Here's the thing, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. that means I can do this reset code and say if x is less than biquad total, and if x is less than biquad total, it'll be done. So I get to use the enums for all kinds of things, including instantiating them. Let's see if it worked. Can we build? Succeeded, no problem. Now, time to take these and put them into the other code, and then once we're finished doing that, some mixing engineers just low pass every track and use low pass and mix bus. Man, you'd get fired by doing that. A lot of people don't like low passing everything unless you're Brian Eno. Brian Eno made a lot of cool stuff about rolling off all the highs all the time, but that's a really quick way to get in trouble if you're working in pop or something like that. A lot of times people just brighten things insanely. I suppose you could be low passing and then have a resonant low pass. And mastering, this is important. Mastering is never about, I use these things to do the thing. Mastering is always about listening to the audio that you've got in a controlled environment with exceptional monitoring where you can hear everything, and then deciding what it needs, if anything. You can do mastering where you kind of clear it through and go, okay, that seems to work, and you don't touch a thing, and you were still doing a mastering job if you do that, because you were thinking about it. You were critically analyzing it and going, what needs to change? No, this is about perfect. I don't think I have to touch anything this time. That counts as mastering. So let's see, let's start doing this. My find and replace is helpful here. Quad. All the biquad zeros need to become biquad freak. So if I do this, everything gets a little bit more labeled. And I'm no problem doing replace all because there's nowhere in this entire plugin where I wouldn't be wanting to do that. So, boop. And there we go. We have an enum. We have now labeled that thing where if you look into this array and label it by this enum element, we're talking about the frequency every time. Every time we're doing this, whether it's in the middle of calculating this, we're starting with this, and we're building it out of the biquad frequency and so on. And now we're going to go through and do that with everything. This won't be updated because this is biquad X, and that's not going to show up anywhere. And let's see. 1 will become reso. Two will become A0, which is part of how these things work. Funnily enough, this is using a different font, so I don't have the cross through the 0 here, but when I update it, it will have the cross at the relevant place. A0 and the 0 has the crossbar. 3. Interestingly, I'm going to have to keep track because it's no longer telling me what the number is. So allow me to go kind of incoherent for a while I keep track of this stuff. It is at least fairly consistent in some ways. If I do this successfully, I'll never have to worry about that bit again. If I get this wrong, it's a world of hurt, so let's not get it wrong right now. Next after A2 is B1. Good, good. I'm looking at where it updates and making sure that it's the way that I want. It needs to be the one on the bottom of the list here. After B1 goes B2. Fair enough. If I hit this, it should do it, and it did. I'm not looking at chat right now. You're talking about other things, which I'm not going to be up for handling right in the moment. 7. One after that would be, after B2, SL1. Eight will be SL2, and there will be no others. 8, not 9. Ooh, problem averted. Narrowly averted a danger. And that's literally all. And we've even updated the stuff in these notes down here, which I will leave in place for the time being, because it'll go into my code repository. So if anybody wanted to calculate a high shelf or whatever, they'd be able to do it. They would need an additional thing like this peak gain. And that would be required for if they were coding a high shelf that also operated in biquads. That has its own merits. I don't really use them that way, but there are ways of doing that effectively. I would rather make a filter that was reconstructed out of multiple cascaded biquads rather than run everything through one biquad that's a shelf and then run everything through another biquad that's another shelf and so on, because it seems like that's just not the way that I want to do it. Mainly because if you do that, you're going through all of the calculations and then taking the result on the end. Whereas if we do it with my sort of constructive solid geometry style doing it, of subtracting things from other things, if the processing has a sound, you're building stuff at a very high resolution out of what the sound made plus this inverse of what the sound like, subtracting it. And that means if you add them back together again to get flat, you get the flat that's not just calculated running through multiple things that are supposed to do nothing. You're running through things and then literally taking the logical opposites of those things, adding them back together and getting a true flat that is perfect to within the tiniest parameter. So it would be as if it never ran through a filter at all. That's why I try to do it with the multiple cascading filters rather than this shelf stuff. But it's here in the notes. It's here in the code, in case anybody wants it. I'm curious as to how deeply it's built into the code. Like we've got, V here. So my other stuff doesn't use that at all. But V is part of how we calculate this. And peak gain is expressed in dB, but that just turns it into this, where V would be 1 if it was unity gain. So it's effectively like if you wanted to make it a cut from unity gain to 0, you could just use the controls off of one of the VSTs and use that. Maybe it would be fun to make some filters where it is done with this shelving technique, because I'm not typically a fan of that, but it could be done. I mean, we could do it. Not unthinkable. And where does V come in? V comes in here. So it shows up in assigning these factors, and then these are sort of after effects. And again, it shows up in, with the cut, the V comes in on these factors. With the boost, it comes in on all of these factors. So that's apparently how that balances out. A is, I believe, the immediate coefficient, and B is the delayed coefficient. So if you start fooling with the gain on the delayed coefficient, you're doing a cut. And if you're fooling with the gain on the direct coefficient and not touching the delayed coefficient, you get a boost. And I don't know what happens if you do both. Maybe that'd be something to play with someday. We can dive into this stuff and experiment like mad. But firstly, let's confirm that this worked. Because it's kind of important to check that. We'll fire up that drum sound again. Oh, yeah, good point, chat, that yes, a lot of mastering is adding highs, but that doesn't necessarily apply to anything. Notably, if you start putting lots of highs on guitars, they'll get what you might call ratty. They'll become unpleasant sounding, especially if they're like high gain distorted electric guitars going through amps. Guitars often want to go through this very band limited speaker cabinet. We normally run guitars through 12-inch speakers and get our sound out of that. If you took the raw output of the amplifier, it would sound very strange and very different. And the low pass of the physical speaker is not infinite. You can like run 40K through a Celestian speaker and get a surprising amount of sound out of that, but it's nowhere near as loud as like the speaker's resonant frequencies. So here we go. Looks like it works to me. We've got enums. Thank you, Bacon Paul. Paul is the fellow from the Surge synthesizer thing who suggested using enums and was like, "Well, I don't want to mess with your vibe, man." But I decided that it was a really cool suggestion, and so now we have implemented that. We have enums working. They look like this. Boop. So the next thing that we do is start adding more. Oh, here's a thought. Let's see if we can do this. This will be interesting. Check this out. Copy or delete. Look, we're defining it. But see how we have the 11 there? Let's see if we can do this. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. This should be an 11. Let's see if we can instantiate the variable using this enum. Will it build? It builds. Will it work? My guess is that's going to be a yes. We'll make sure. Just kind of double checking. I have this suspicion this is going to be fine. Alrighty. So here's one of the neat things about enums and why Paul was recommending them. See what we've got here? We've got these. And look at this. I just did stuff. I moved the one from one place to another, and then I just put a random silly one that means nothing in here. Can we build? Yes, we can. Will it work even though I just moved that one from one place, and so there is a completely different index number for it? This is why Paul was suggesting enums. Check this out. Works just fine. And that's because if you do everything based on enums for referring to this stuff, and finishing off with the total, all I did was like add another thing. I added it anywhere I wanted. It didn't matter. I moved this from here to here. I'll move it back just for the sake of propriety. And I could add a random word in here, any kind of variable that I want to stick in there. And what's happening is the next time it calculates it through, it goes like, oh, okay, Biquad A2 is now an index number of 9 instead of like 5. And then everything else in the code is not looking up 9s or 5s or whatever. It's just looking up whatever that happens to be. Like we're looking up Biquad A2, and it doesn't matter what this is because it's always looking it up by this identifying mark. So basically, this is a way of being able to expand out this little chunk of code and do anything that I want to it or add anything that I want to it and be able to just always just use it. I can tack something else in there and just start using it anywhere I want. That's super handy. And I'll tell you why. It's because I'm going to start doing that right away. The next thing that I'm doing, if I can get all this done in 2 hours, I'll be very impressed with myself. But part of it is being able to do stuff like Paul was suggesting. You do this kind of thing, and then you can update all manner of stuff very smoothly and easily. And I can update this stuff kind of on the fly. All the coffee. We're going to do this. We're going to do this smoothing thing and have a default Biquad that can do that interpolating. And it's going to look like this. Except for without the numbers. Instead, it's going to be these identifiers. You have a separate stage to interpolate every coefficient into the biquad, or just use the one in buffer space. What that means is we're going to add some more parameters right here. Namely, we're going to do BA. I think we're going to just want this A0, 1, and 2 and B1 and 2. But we're going to add some more. A and B, I think. It'll go from A at the beginning of the buffer to B at the end of the buffer, which is the target. So how shall we go about doing that? Because we can put this anywhere we want. So what I could do is just go boop. I'm going to want a total collection of 5 of each. This is the one that gets used in the actual